Ask him about Mateo Reyes, a ranger's secret. Almost cost him everything he ever loved. He hadn't meant to stop at the gate that evening. He never did. The southward habit had grown into him, the way drought grows into dirt quietly without asking, until you couldn't remember what the land looked like before. Eli Harrow walked that same quarter mile every Sunday at dusk, carrying nothing but the weight he'd been born to carry 3 years running, and he knelt at the mesquite marker the same way each time, not in prayer exactly, more in the posture of a man who has run out of arguments with God. He was still on his knees when he heard the sound. Not a coyote, not the wind, something heavier, wetter, something that breathed. He found her face down in the red Texas dust 20 yards from his gate, one hand still gripping the handle of a wooden trunk as if it were the last rope over a cliff. She wasn't moving. Her dress was torn at the hem, caked past saving. One foot wore a boot. The other was bare, the sole blistered black. Eli stood over her for 3 full seconds. Behind him up the hill, 6-year-old Ren was watching from the porch. He didn't need to turn around to know it. He could feel her eyes the same way you feel weather coming, a pressure behind the sternum, low and patient. Ren had not spoken a single word in 10 months. Not since the fever took her mother and left the child behind like an afterthought of grief. And yet somehow in this moment, Eli could hear her as clearly as if she'd shouted, "Help her, Uncle Eli. If you don't, I will." He crouched down, pressed 2 fingers to the woman's throat. Pulse thin, fast, irregular. Heat sickness. 2 days without water, maybe more judging by the color of her lips. He'd seen rangers die this way in the brush country south of the Nueces. Most of them never made it back. He picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. That was the worst part, not the limp weight of her, but how little there was of her to save. He carried her through the gate, up the hill, past the well that gleamed dull silver in the last of the evening light, and into the 2-room cabin that had been his whole world for 3 years. He laid her on the kitchen table, the only surface long enough, and turned to find Ren already there, the rag doll pressed against her chest, dark eyes enormous in her thin face. "Fetch the water pail," Eli said. Ren moved without a sound. "Why, if you want to know how one dusty summer road led to the most important story Sweetwater Flats ever witnessed, stay with me to the very end. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, and tell me what city you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel." The woman's name was Clara Vane. Eli learned it 2 hours later, after the water and the wet cloth and the careful tipping of broth between cracked lips had done their slow work. She came back to consciousness the way certain rivers return after drought, not all at once, but in stages, each one a little stronger than the last. Her eyes opened, green, startled, terrified. She tried to sit up, nearly rolled off the table. "Easy." Eli's hand found her shoulder, pressed her back down. His touch was careful, the way a man is careful around something wounded. Not tenderness exactly, but the absence of aggression. "You're safe, you're inside." She looked at the ceiling, then the walls, then at Ren, who stood at the edge of the room with her rag doll and her enormous, watchful eyes. "Where?" Her voice came out scraped and raw like wood pulled across a nail. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Where is this?" "My land. Name's Eli Harrow. This is my niece, Ren." Ren did not respond to her name. She simply kept looking at the woman with an intensity that made something clench in Eli's chest. Ren hadn't looked at a stranger that way since before. Since the fever. Since the silence. "My trunk." The woman's hand found the edge of the table, gripped it. "Outside." "It's on the porch. It's fine." You need water and to lie still. The trunk can wait." She looked at him, really looked, the kind of searching look that people do when they're trying to decide how much to trust. Then something in her settled. Not surrender, something more deliberate than that. A choice. "Clara Vane," she said. "People call me Clara." "How long were you walking?" "I don't know. The stage dropped me at a junction. The driver said Sweetwater Flats was 10 miles. She closed her eyes. "I think he lied." "It's 18. A long pause. "That explains several things." Eli wrung out the cloth, folded it, laid it across her forehead. "Who sent you here?" Her eyes opened again. Something shifted in them, not fear, but the awareness of a door about to open that she hadn't intended to open yet. "Judge Harlan Crest," she said. "He wrote to me in Boston. Said the town needed a teacher. Sent travel money and a letter of appointment." She paused. "Is that a problem?" Eli said nothing for a long moment. He moved to the stove, lifted the pot, poured more water into the tin cup. When he brought it back and helped her drink, his face gave away nothing that hadn't already been decided long before she arrived. Rest first, he said. Problems can wait. But they both knew they couldn't. And somewhere in the room, Wren's dark eyes moved back and forth between the two adults like she was reading a sentence that neither of them was willing to speak aloud. Again, Clara slept through the evening and most of the night. Eli sat at the kitchen table and cleaned his rifle. Not because it needed cleaning, it didn't, but because his hands needed the occupation. Outside, the Texas dark pressed hard against the windows, and the heat had not broken. It never broke in July. It just redistributed, moving from the ground into the air, circling like something that intended to come back. He thought about what Clara Vane's arrival meant. He'd been watching Harlan Crest for 2 years. Watching the way a man watches a river that's been dammed upstream quietly without touching anything, tracking the pressure building behind the wood and the stone. Crest owned the bank, the mercantile credit, the courthouse, and 3 of the 4 water claims in the county. The one thing he didn't own was the 10 acres Eli sat on, the 10 acres with the only working well in Sweetwater Flats. Crest had tried legal pressure, tax irregularities conveniently discovered, credit lines for feed and supplies quietly cut off. None of it had been enough. Eli owed Crest nothing, which made him dangerous, which made him a problem that required a different kind of solution. And now a woman, an unmarried woman, delivered to his doorstep. In 1882 Texas, that was enough. Not for murder, not for theft, but for a morality complaint. For a hearing before a judge who was also the judge. For a declaration of unfitness to hold property. He used her, Eli thought. He used her before she even knew she was being used. He set down the rifle. From the back room, his room where he'd moved Clara to his bed because it was the only real sleeping surface in the cabin, he could hear her breathing. Even and slow. Alive. On the floor beside the door, Wren had made herself a pallet with 2 quilts and was curled around her ragdoll, eyes closed. She'd refused to go to her own cot in the front room. She was apparently guarding something. 6 years old. 10 months of silence. More iron in her spine than most men he'd served with. Eli picked up the pencil from the table and started doing the math he'd been avoiding. How long the well would hold. How many ranchers were left in the valley who hadn't already sold out or dried up. How many weeks until Crest made his next move? The numbers didn't add up. They never did. She was awake when he brought coffee in the morning. Sitting up in his bed, back against the wall, the quilt pulled to her waist, already attempting to reconstruct her dignity from available materials. She'd smoothed her hair. She'd straightened her collar despite the collar being torn. Her hands were folded in her lap with the composure of a woman who had practiced surviving difficult mornings. The trunk sat on the floor beside the bed. Someone had brought it in. He hadn't asked Wren to do it. He hadn't asked Wren to do anything. Thank you, Clara said, nodding at the coffee. Eli set the cup on the small table beside the bed and stood. There was no chair in the room. He'd never needed one. He leaned against the doorframe instead. How'd you end up in Boston? He asked. You sound more Pennsylvania. She looked at him with something like surprise, the look of someone who didn't expect to be heard that precisely. Philadelphia, she said. I taught 3rd and 4th grade at Edgeworth School for 9 years. I was good at it. She picked up the coffee, held it without drinking. 2 years ago, I started teaching reading to colored children on Saturday mornings. My own classroom after hours. Primers I bought with my own money. Eli waited. The school board found out. She drank, set the cup down. They didn't fire me right away. That would have been honest. Instead, they reassigned my class, gave me the supply closet as an office, sent anonymous letters to parents calling me morally unfit. Her jaw tightened. One board member told me to my face that I was corrupting the natural order, that some people weren't meant to read. What did you say? I said if God didn't want them reading, he wouldn't have given them eyes. A beat of silence. That's when they fired you, Eli said. That's when they fired me. She almost smiled. No school in Philadelphia would touch me after that. No school in Pennsylvania. I wrote 67 letters. She looked at the trunk. Judge Crest was the only one who wrote back. Tell me about the junction, Eli said. She told him. The stage. The manifest that showed a ticket to Thornton Junction, not Sweetwater Flats. The driver who pointed her south and said 10 miles with a face that gave nothing away. The walk, the heat, the moment her second boot gave out 2 miles from nowhere. When she finished, the silence between them was the kind that happens after something true has been laid on a table and both people are deciding whether to pick it up. He did it on purpose, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He knew I'd end up here. Only ranch between the junction and town, yes. And now I'm here. An unmarried woman under your roof. She was quiet for a moment, working through the geometry of it. He's going to file a morality complaint. He's going to file a morality complaint against you to take the land. She looked at the window at the strip of morning sky visible above the sill. He used me as the mechanism. Her voice was careful, precise, the way a person is careful when they're holding something that might cut them if they grip it wrong. Before I'd even arrived, before I knew any of this existed. Yes, she set the coffee down, looked at him directly. And what do you intend to do about it? Eli pushed off the door frame. What do you intend to do about it? He said. Clara Vane looked at him with those green eyes in the morning light and said without hesitation, I intend to teach. Nay. She found the envelope at the bottom of her trunk on the second morning. She'd been unpacking tearfully 38 books wrapped in cloth and oil paper, a geography atlas, 2 McGuffey readers, a worn copy of Aesop's Fables that she'd owned since she was 7 years old, when her fingers found something tucked beneath the false bottom she'd never known was there. A plain envelope, unsealed, a single folded paper inside. She read it standing up in the pale early light while Wren slept on her pallet by the door. The handwriting was not a hand she recognized. The ink was fresh, no more than a week old. The message was 8 words, victims. Ask him about Mateo Reyes, then decide. Clara folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, stood for a long time with it in her hands looking at the window where the Texas morning was just beginning to happen. Then she tucked the envelope inside the cover of the Aesop's Fables and went to make coffee. She would ask, but not yet. Not until she knew this place better. Not until she understood who might want her to ask and why, and what they were hoping the asking would do. Then decide, the note said. She had not come 18 miles through killing heat to be decided for. 3 days after Clara arrived, a boy rode up the road on a half-starved horse with a split lip and both eyes going to purple. Clara was on the porch when she heard the hooves coming fast from the east, from the direction of town, the kind of riding that meant something was chasing you even when nothing was. She stepped off the porch and met him at the gate. He was 16 maybe. Brown-skinned, dark-haired, the kind of lean that comes from not enough food over too many years. He pulled the horse up hard and nearly fell off, and when he didn't fall, it was only because his hands knew the saddle the way someone's hands know something they've done 1,000 times before. Where's Mr. Harrow? He said. His voice was trying to be older than his face. South fence. What happened to you? I need Mr. Harrow. He's not here. I'm here. Clara came closer, reached up and turned his chin toward the light. Split lip fresh, cheekbone already swelling. Knuckles scraped raw on the right hand, the defensive hand. Someone had hit him more than once, and he'd tried to cover up. Who did this? He looked at her the way people look at strangers when they are deciding how much truth is safe to spend. You're the teacher. I'm the teacher, and you're a boy who needs his cuts cleaned. Get down. He got down. He followed her inside, moving carefully the way you move when you're in a place where you haven't been told you're welcome. Wren watched him from her corner, with the rag doll pressed against her chest, assessing. His name was Rafael Soto. He worked for Eli, sometimes fence work, hauling when there was work to have, which wasn't often. The drought was killing everyone's labor the way it was killing everything else. Who hit you? Clara asked, pressing clean cloth to his lip. His jaw tightened. Crest's men, 3 of them, caught me filling my mother's water jugs at the creek. He winced as she pressed harder. Said Mexicans don't have water rights. Said Judge Crest owns that creek now. Does he? Filed a claim last month. My mother can't fight it. Nobody in the valley can. He wiped blood from his chin with the back of his wrist. I told them she had a right to water, same as anyone. And that's when they hit you. That's when they hit me. Clara sat back and looked at this boy, 16 years old, beaten for the audacity of thirst. Carrying himself with a dignity nobody had asked him to maintain, and he maintained anyway, as if dignity were the one possession they hadn't figured out how to take yet. Can you read? She asked. He stiffened. Some. My mother taught me Spanish letters. English ones are harder. I'm a teacher, Clara said. That's what I came here to do. Crest School don't take my kind. Then we'll make one that does. He stared at her. Then slowly, with the wariness of someone who has been offered things before and watched them evaporate, he looked at Wren. Wren, who had crossed the room without sound and was now standing in front of him, holding out her rag doll. An offering, the most she'd given anyone in 10 months. Raphael took the doll with both hands carefully as if it were made of something breakable. Gracias, he said quietly. He looked at the doll, at the child, at Clara. Gracias, pequeña. Ren sat down beside him, close, trusting. Two children the world had decided didn't count finding each other in a dusty kitchen. Clara turned away before either of them could see her face. Eli came back at noon and found the situation waiting for him. He was through the door in 3 strides when he saw Raphael's horse at the gate. He stopped in the kitchen entrance, took in the boy's face, and his expression didn't change, but his hand closed slowly at his side, the knuckles going white by degrees. Crest's men, Clara said from the stove. She didn't turn around. 3 of them. Beat him for filling his mother's water jugs at the creek. Dalton was one. A long silence. Which 3? Eli said. It ain't worth, Raphael started. Which 3? Raphael told him. Eli turned toward the door. Clara stepped into his path. She was a foot shorter than him and outweighed by 60 pounds, and she planted herself like a fence post that had been driven in properly. Where are you going? To have a conversation. With your fists or your mouth. Depends on their answers. And when Crest arrests you for assault, Clara said, keeping her voice level, the way you keep a lamp level when you are walking in wind, when he uses it to prove you're the violent man he's been telling everyone you are, what, then? She didn't move. That's exactly what he wants. You ride in there with bloody knuckles, and he's won before you've started. Eli breathed through his nose. The fist unclenched, clenched again. Behind him, Ren had pressed herself against the wall, her body taut, her eyes enormous. She'd seen anger before. Clara could read it in the child's posture, the specific quality of stillness that comes from knowing from memory that raised voices can precede worse things. Clara softened her voice. Eli. She nodded toward Ren. He turned, saw his niece against the wall. The rigidity in his shoulders dropped at once, replaced by something that looked like grief and like recognition, and like the particular kind of shame that only belongs to the people we love most. He crossed the room in 2 steps and crouched in front of Ren and opened his arms. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she crashed into him, arms around his neck, face buried in his shoulder, small body trembling with the effort of everything she'd been holding since he turned toward the door. I'm sorry, Ren, he said into her hair. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Over the child's head, his eyes found Clara's. The anger was still there, not gone, but changed, compressed into something smaller and harder and more deliberate, something that could be aimed rather than scattered. You're right, he said quietly, as if the admission cost him. That wasn't smart. It was human, Clara said. We need more than human right now. Eli stood, Ren still clinging to his neck. He looked at Raphael, who was watching from the table with the expression of someone watching a fuse burn. Tell me everything you know about this town, Eli said to Clara. Who Crest owns? Who hates him? Who's afraid? Who has nothing left to lose? I've been here 4 days. You talked to 11 people already. I watched. Clara paused. Then you noticed that? I noticed things. So do I, she said, and she went back to the stove. Eva. That evening, Eli rode to every ranch that still had smoke rising from its chimney. He came back with nothing promised and everything understood. The Hatchet Place north of the valley, the Crane homestead 2 miles east, Old Dawson on the ridge, every one of them struggling, every one of them watching their credit dry up the same way the creek had dried slowly, and then all at once under the same invisible hand. He told them about the well, open to everyone, he said. No conditions. Free water as long as the well held. They came the next morning. 3 families, then 5. Barrels loaded onto wagon beds, horses standing patient in the heat while the bucket went down and came back up cold and clean. Eli worked the pump handle himself. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make speeches. He just pumped. Ren sat on the fence and watched the families come and go. Raphael's mother arrived mid-morning, a small woman with flour on her hands and iron in her bearing, who looked at the well and then looked at Eli with the particular expression of someone calculating how much a kindness is going to cost her before she can afford to accept it. Senora Soto, Eli said, you're welcome here as long as you need. She looked at him for a long moment. My son has been telling me about the teacher, she said. She's inside. I know. Senora Soto lifted her water jug and walked up the porch steps and knocked on the door. Yeah. That evening, after the families had gone and the day's heat had settled into a dull throb above the horizon, Clara sat on the porch steps with the Aesop's Fables in her lap. The envelope was still inside the front cover, where she'd put it 2 mornings ago. The shadow fell across her before she heard the footsteps. What did you see? Eli said. He sat on the step beside her without asking, leaving a foot of space between them. When you were looking in the trunk this morning, before breakfast, I saw your face. Clara looked at him. In the fading light, the angles of him were more apparent. The jaw, the cheekbones, the careful stillness that wasn't peace, but the discipline that approximates peace when peace isn't available. She took the envelope out of the book and held it. "Someone put this into my trunk," she said. "At the junction, I think. Or before I boarded. I don't know." She handed it to him. "I haven't asked you yet. I wanted to understand this place first." Eli unfolded the paper. "Read the 8 words. Ask him about Mateo Reyes, then decide." He read them twice. His face did something she couldn't quite name. Not guilt exactly, because guilt moves, guilt flinches. This was something more settled than guilt. Something a person looks like when they've been carrying a stone so long they've stopped remembering it's a stone. He refolded the paper, put it back in the envelope, held it out to her. "Keep it," he said. "Who's Mateo Reyes?" The Texas dark was fully down now. Somewhere to the south, a coyote called once and went silent, and the silence that followed was the kind that comes after. "Before I was a rancher," Eli said, "I was a Texas Ranger. 7 years. I was good at it." He looked at his hands. They were resting on his knees, open the way hands rest when they're not holding anything. 3 years ago, I was tracking a man who'd robbed a coach outside San Antonio. Night pursuit. Brush was thick, you couldn't see past 10 feet. I heard movement. Called out. Something came through the brush, fast. He stopped. Started again. I fired. Clara waited. It was a boy, 15 years old, Mexican. He'd been out hunting rabbits in the brush country south of the Nueces. Wrong place. Wrong night. He died before I could get him to a doctor. Eli's hand stayed open still. "His name was Mateo Reyes. I turned in my badge the next morning. Came here. Bought this land with everything I had." Clara looked at his profile in the dark. She thought about what he'd just said. She thought about the 8 words in the envelope. She thought about who might have put them there and what they wanted the knowledge to do. "You tend to grave on your land," she said. Not a question. She'd seen it. That first evening looking south from the bedroom window. The mesquite. The marker. "Mateo's marker," Eli said. "His family's 4 days south. I found them, told them what happened. They didn't want my words. I don't blame them, but I send money when I can, and I tend the marker." He paused. "The mesquite's grown tall. Gives shade." Clara looked at the envelope in her hands. She thought about who had put it there. Someone who knew Mateo's name. Someone who wanted her to know Eli had blood on his hands before she trusted him. Someone who worked perhaps close enough to Crest to know when a new teacher was arriving and to slip a note in a trunk at a stage junction. Not a warning to protect her. A wedge, designed to break trust before it formed. "In Philadelphia," she said carefully, "they called me dangerous because I thought children deserved to learn. That was my crime." She looked at him. "Yours was an accident on a dark night doing a dangerous job. That don't change what happened." "No, but it changes what happens next, if you let it." Eli said nothing. He looked south toward the mesquite. He couldn't see in the dark, but knew was there. The way you know certain things not by sight, but by the permanent weight of them in your chest. After a long time, he said, "Someone put that envelope in your trunk on purpose. They wanted you to know before you decided whether to stay." "I know. That means someone inside Crest's operation wanted us divided." He paused. "Or someone who hates Crest wanted you to know the whole truth before you walked into something you didn't understand." "I've been wondering which one," Clara said. "You're still here." "I walked 18 miles in one boot to get here," she said. "It would take considerably more than 8 words to make me leave." The coyote called again, closer this time, and then another answered from the far ridge, and the valley between them was full of their conversation, while the people on the porch sat in their separate silences, each of them working out what they were willing to trust and what they were willing to risk and what the difference was between those two things. Nishem. Wren found her the next morning at the kitchen table with the Aesop's open in her lap. Not the envelope, the book itself. Clara had it open to the fable of the north wind and the sun, the one about the traveler and the cloak about the argument over who was stronger, about how force fails where warmth succeeds. Wren padded in barefoot, her ragdoll trailing from one hand, and stood beside the table. She looked at the page for a long moment. Then she reached out and put one finger on the illustration. The sun. Golden, round, patient. She looked up at Clara. "You want me to read it?" Clara asked. Wren's hand moved. Touched the sun again. Then slowly, with great deliberateness, as if the movement required decision rather than impulse, she pointed the same finger at Clara. "You are the sun." Clara's throat did something complicated. Shall we start from the beginning, she said. Wren climbed into the chair beside her and settled her rag doll on the table and folded her hands and waited. She waited with the focused patience of a person who has learned that waiting is not the same as losing. That stillness is not the same as surrender. Clara began to read. Outside the well was already drawing its first visitors of the morning. Eli was at the pump sleeves, rolled the familiar rhythm of the handle moving through him like something meditative. Raphael was sitting on the porch steps with a piece of chalk and the word "thee" written 3 times on the floorboard, saying each letter carefully under his breath. The valley heat was climbing toward its daily brutality. But in the kitchen of the cabin that had been silent for too long, a teacher read to a child about the sun and the wind and the argument between them. Wren sat perfectly still and listened with her whole body. Her lips moved faint and involuntary, tracing the shapes of words she couldn't yet make sounds for. She was already learning. She had been learning for weeks in the way certain things learn before they know they're learning, absorbing the shape of language, the rhythm of sentences, the architecture of stories, waiting for the moment when the inside and the outside connected. It was not that moment, not yet, but it was close. And somewhere south under the mesquite tree, a marker stood in the dry grass, and the bees moved through the yellow flowers, and the morning light came across the valley floor with all the patience of something that has never once been in a hurry. The problems came before the week was out, as Eli had known they would. But in that kitchen, in that morning with Wren's finger on the page and Clara's voice finding the cadence of the old story, something had been started that Harlan Crest had not anticipated when he set his trap. Something that wasn't a weapon and wasn't a war. Something quieter and more dangerous than either. A school. The first school day happened by accident, the way the best things often do. Clara had not announced it. She had not prepared anything beyond what she had: 38 books, 2 pieces of chalk she'd found in the bottom of the trunk, and the belief that it had cost her a career, but that she'd carried anyway all the way from Philadelphia to a burned-out valley in Texas because some beliefs are cheaper to keep than to abandon. She was reading to Wren on the porch when Raphael arrived with 2 younger children. She'd never seen a girl of 8 and a boy of 6, both barefoot, both squinting up at her with the careful curiosity of children who have learned to be careful about where they express curiosity. Their mother said it was all right, Raphael said. He was holding the chalk words he'd been practicing. I told her you were teaching. Clara looked at the 3 children, standing in a row in the morning heat. Sit down, she said. All of you. They sat on the porch boards. Clara opened the McGuffey reader and started at the beginning, which is always the right place to start. By mid-morning, there were 5 children. By the next day, 7. Parents arrived with them, stood at the gate long enough to satisfy themselves that this was real and not some new version of disappointment, then left their children and went back to the shrinking work of surviving summer. Eli watched from a distance. He said nothing about it. He tended the animals, worked the pump for the families who came and took long rides along the fence lines that didn't strictly require long rides. Clara understood this was his way of giving her room to build what she was building without the weight of his observation. It was, she thought, a remarkably decent instinct for a man who had spent 3 years trying to turn himself into furniture. The threat came on the 4th day. A sheet of paper nailed to the porch post. No signature. Block letters cut from newspaper pasted together with flour paste, crude and deliberate, the kind of message designed to communicate not just its content, but the laziness of the contempt behind it. Send the Mexican boy away or face consequences. School is not for his kind. Clara pulled it down before the children arrived. She burned it in the stove. She told no one except Eli, who found the paste residue on the post and the ash in the stove, and said nothing, only looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, the one that meant he had added this to the list he was already keeping. Raphael arrived that morning with his mother's tamales wrapped in cloth. Enough for everyone. He moved stiffly. When Clara looked closely, she saw the fresh bruises on his forearms, the defensive kind, the kind that come from covering your face. Again, she said, I handled it. He would not look at her. They waited for you on the road. He set down the tamales. They said if I come back, they'll burn my mother's house. His voice was steady in the way a 16-year-old's voice is steady when it is trying very hard to be a man's voice. I came back anyway. Clara gripped his shoulder. He flinched, then held still. You're the bravest student I've ever taught. Brave is just dumb. That doesn't turn around, he said. No, she said. It isn't, not even close. She let go of his shoulder and turned back to the porch and the 7 children, waiting for their lesson. And she taught them until noon with the specific focus of a person who knows that continuing is itself a form of argument. That night, while the children slept, Eli told her about Sarah. It wasn't what she'd expected. She'd been expecting more about Mateo Reyes, another layer of the story perhaps, or an explanation of the note. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, and Eli had come in from checking the animals and poured himself water. And then instead of going to the barn where he'd been sleeping since Senora Soto arrived, sat down across from her. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I don't want you to say anything until I'm finished." She nodded. "I had a wife, Sarah, 4 years ago." He held the cup without drinking. She was gentle, quiet in a way that wasn't absence, it was fullness. She could grow anything, had a garden that made the whole valley jealous. He paused. "She got sick while I was on a chase, 3 days north tracking a rustler ring that turned out to be 2 men and a mule. Nothing, less than nothing." His voice was even careful, too careful the way water is careful around a cracked dam. "By the time I got back, she'd been in a fever 4 days, with no doctor and nobody to make the ride to town. The Soto family found her. Senora Soto sat with her." He stopped. "Clara kept the promises she'd made. She said nothing. She died that night." He set the cup down. "I was building a future for her. That's what I told myself every time I took a posting away. Every time I was gone, I was building something bigger, something safer." He looked at his hands. "The garden dried up after. I couldn't bring myself to water it. I tore it out the second year." The lamp made soft sounds. Outside, the night was absolute. "Ren doesn't know all of it," he said. "She knows her uncle did something that broke him. She doesn't know which thing." Clara looked at him across the table. She thought about what to say. She thought about the note. Ask him about Mateo Reyes, and she thought about the person who sent it, who had known about Mateo and not apparently about Sarah, who had wanted her to see the blood and not the grief underneath it. "She would have told you to go," Clara said. "Sarah, every time you left, she would have told you to go because that's what people do when they love someone. They tell them to go do the thing, and they wait, and the waiting is its own kind of love." She held his eyes. "You didn't fail her by being absent. You failed her by not being afraid enough to come home when you should have been afraid." Eli's face moved, just slightly, a shift around the eyes. "That distinction," he said slowly, "is either very kind or very exact. It can be both." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. The before silence had been the kind that holds things apart. This was the kind that lets things rest. "Who do you think put the note in your trunk?" he asked. "Someone in Crest's operation," Clara said. "Someone who works close enough to him to know I was coming, but someone who wanted me to leave or to distrust you, not someone who wanted me to understand." "Or someone who wanted you to understand everything," Eli said. "Good and bad, before you committed to any of it." She looked at him. "There's someone in this town," he said, "who has been watching Crest for longer than I have. Someone careful. Someone who keeps things." He paused. "Her name is Agnes Pryor. She runs the mercantile." "I'll go to town tomorrow," Clara said. "It's not safe for you alone. I've survived 18 miles of July in one boot. I'll manage a trip to the mercantile." He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she'd been cataloging since she arrived, the one that started and then thought better of itself, then reconsidered. This time it made it halfway before retreating. "Take the gray horse," he said. "She's the steadiest." "I'll take the one you call the sorry horse," Clara said. "She and I understand each other." In the front room, Ren lay on her cot with her eyes open in the dark. She could hear the voices from the kitchen, low, careful, the cadence of two people saying difficult things to each other without breaking. She didn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She held her rag doll against her chest with one hand. With the other, she traced letters on the blanket. The letters from the porch, less than the ones Clara had written in chalk on the floorboards while the other children watched. "THE, C8, SAT. Her lips moved. No sound, not yet. The sounds were there. She could feel them, could feel the shape of them behind her teeth and on her tongue, the particular way a T required the tip and a S required the breath. But something between the wanting and the doing was not yet finished, not yet ready. She was not afraid of the silence anymore. She had been at first afraid that it was permanent, that she had broken something that couldn't be fixed, that the grief had taken her voice as surely as it had taken her mother. But the teacher had come, and the teacher read stories, and the stories said that things grew back, that what was silent could speak again, that the sun was patient and that patience won. Ren traced the letters on the blanket until she fell asleep. Outside the well stood in the dark patient as everything worth waiting for. And in the kitchen, a former ranger and a disgraced teacher sat across a table from each other and talked until the lamp ran low. And what they said was nothing and everything, the way conversations are when two people have stopped performing for each other and started simply being in the same place at the same time without pretending it cost them nothing. The morning would come. Crest would come. The problems were already set in motion, already heading toward this valley, the way weather heads toward open land, inevitable, indifferent to readiness. But not yet. For now, the well held. The mesquite stood over a boy named Mateo with its yellow flowers and its bees, Wren-traced letters in the dark. And in the space between two people who had both been told they were broken and had both refused to entirely believe it, something was taking shape that had no name yet. Something that would require a name later when there was time, when the danger had passed and the building could begin. For now, it was enough that it existed, that it was there quiet and deliberate like water finding the cracks. Agnes Pryor's general store smelled like dried herbs, axle grease, and 20 years of other people's transactions. It was the kind of smell that accumulated only in places where all the real business of a community eventually passed through not the courthouse, not the church, but the counter where people bought flour and lamp oil and tried to keep their pride intact while they did it. The bell above the door jangled when Clara pushed it open. The woman behind the counter was built like a wagon that had been given no choice but to endure. Steel gray hair pinned without ceremony. Eyes that saw everything and filed it away with a speed that suggested long practice. She looked up at Clara without surprise, which was itself informative. "You're the teacher," Agnes said. "Not a question. I'm the teacher, and I need to talk to you." Agnes set down the ledger she'd been working on. She came around the counter with the deliberate, unhurried motion of someone who has never once needed to rush because they always know what's coming. "Half this town thinks you're a Jezebel," she said. "Other half thinks you're insane." "Which half are you?" Agnes considered this. "I'm the half that remembers when this town had a real school. Before Harlan Crest decided that education was a privilege instead of a right. Before my granddaughter had to ride 40 miles for a decent lesson in long division. She planted herself like a woman who has made her decision and is done deliberating. What do you need?" Clara told her about the note, the 8 words, the handwriting she didn't recognize. She watched Agnes's face as she spoke and saw behind the composed surface the flicker of someone receiving news they have been halfway expecting for a long time. "You know who wrote it," Clara said. Agnes looked at her steadily. "I might know whose hand that is. Someone in Crest's office. Crest has a clerk, young man, not a bad young man." Agnes paused. "The ones who aren't bad are sometimes the most useful because they notice what they're asked not to notice, and they write down what they're told to forget." Clara sat down in the chair by the counter without being invited. "Tell me about the dispatch." Agnes went still. "The night Mateo Reyes died," Clara said, "Eli was sent south into the brush country toward the Mexican settlements. He was tracking a coach robber who was apparently heading north." She kept her voice level. "I've been thinking about that since the note arrived. Someone told the Rangers to go south, someone with the authority to issue a dispatch." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Come with me." The back room of Agnes Pryor's store was something between a private archive and a small museum of grievance. Shelves of ledgers, hat boxes stuffed with correspondence, a wooden crate sealed with wax that hadn't been opened in what looked like 3 years. Agnes opened the crate. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a single sheet of paper. "I've had this since the month after Mateo Reyes died," Agnes said. She held it out to Clara without touching the surface. "The clerk, his name doesn't matter. He left town 6 months later. He found this in the dispatch record and copied it before the original was destroyed. He gave it to me because he didn't know what else to do with it." Clara took the paper. "Read it." It was a dispatch order. Standard form, standard language. Directing a ranger patrol south into brush country, citing a report of the robbery suspect heading toward the Nueces settlements. Dated the night of Mateo Reyes' death. The signature at the bottom read, "Captain J. Whitmore, District Command." Clara read it twice. Then she looked up at Agnes. "This is Captain Whitmore's signature." "Captain Whitmore was in Galveston that night," Agnes said. "He has a hotel receipt that says so. I obtained a copy of that too." She paused. "That signature is not Whitmore's hand. I have letters with his actual signature. The spacing is wrong. The capital J is wrong. Someone forged it, Clara said. Someone issued a dispatch to send Rangers south using a forged signature, Agnes said with the precision of a person who has been waiting a long time to say these words to someone who would understand them. Someone with access to the dispatch forms. Someone who knew where the Rangers were that night. Someone who needed them in that brush country, in the dark, in a place where a 15-year-old boy might be out hunting rabbits. Clara looked at the paper in her hands. She thought about Eli at the kitchen table with his hands open on his knees. She thought about the marker under the mesquite. She thought about the note in her trunk. Then decide. And she understood now that whoever had written it had wanted her to have this or something like it before she made any choices. He didn't just point Eli in the wrong direction, Clara said. He manufactured the conditions, Agnes said. He needed a tragedy. He needed a Texas Ranger destroyed by guilt and driven off the force. He needed a family evicted from their land in the chaos of grief. He needed a scapegoat who would carry the weight of it quietly and never fight back, because fighting back would mean looking at the thing he couldn't bear to look at. And then he bought the land, Clara said. The Reyes family's land was seized 6 months after Mateo died. Foreclosure on a credit debt that Crest himself had extended. Agnes sat down heavily on the stool in the corner. 14 land seizures in 12 years, every one of them following a crisis that Crest either caused or exploited. Drought, fire, debt, disaster, and there he was, patient as stone, waiting to collect. Clara held the dispatch carefully, the way you hold something you understand to be fragile, not because of its physical nature, but because of what it represents. 20 years of accumulated evidence kept in a hat box by a woman in an apron who had been waiting for someone to come and ask. He's been using Eli's guilt, Clara said, for 3 years. Keeping him silent, keeping him isolated, making sure everyone in this valley knows the story of the ranger who shot a boy. She looked at Agnes. If Eli had ever investigated that night. He never did, Agnes said. Guilt doesn't investigate. Guilt buries itself and tends the grave. She paused. That's why Crest let him keep the land for so long. A man destroyed by what he thinks he did is more useful than a man destroyed by what was done to him. The first kind stays quiet. The second kind gets angry. I need to tell Eli what's in this paper. I know. And I need copies of everything. Every land transfer, every credit manipulation, everything. Agnes looked at her with something that was not quite a smile and not quite a question and was entirely a verdict. I've been making copies for 20 years, she said. I was beginning to think I'd die with them. Eli was at the well when Claire rode back late afternoon, the sorry horse living up to her name in every possible respect. He watched her come up the road and then watched her dismount with the careful deliberateness of someone carrying something fragile in their mind. She tied the horse, walked to where he stood, held out the copy of the dispatch. He read it standing up in the fading light without moving. She watched his face. She had been watching his face for 10 days now, and she had learned its geography, the specific quality of stillness that meant he was processing something large, the way the jaw held when he was deciding whether to be angry, the shift around the eyes when something internal rearranged itself. All of those things happened in sequence while he read. When he was done, he read it again. The signature is forged, Clara said. Agnes has Whitmore's actual letters for comparison. She also has the hotel receipt placing Whitmore in Galveston that night. She paused. Crest issued that dispatch himself. He sent you into that brush country. He sent you into the dark toward a community of families he intended to displace, and he used your guilt afterward as a leash. Eli set the paper down on the well's stone rim. He turned away, walked 10 steps east, stopped. Clara watched his back. She did not follow. She let the distance be what it needed to be. After a long time, he said without turning, I pulled the trigger. Yes, that don't change because someone else aimed me. No, it doesn't. You pulled the trigger and you will carry that, and you should carry it because Mateo Reyes was real and he died, and the carrying is the only honest response. She kept her voice steady. But you've been carrying Crest's portion too. The planning, the dispatch, the forged signature, the eviction of Mateo's family 6 months later, the 14 other families before and after. She paused. That's his weight. He's been letting you wear it for 3 years. I knew something was wrong that night, Eli said. His voice was very controlled. The brush was too quiet. The direction felt wrong. But the order came down and I followed the order and He stopped. You did what you were trained to do, Clara said, in the dark, with a forged command. and then you blamed yourself with such totality that you never looked at the command itself. A long silence. Miguel's family, he said. Mateo's family, the Reyes, the money I send, keep sending it. That's yours to carry. But stop letting Crest use it as a chain. She walked toward him, stopped a few feet away. He doesn't get to own your guilt. He manufactured the circumstance, and you paid the price, and he has been leveraging your shame ever since to keep you small, keep you quiet, keep you off his back while he steals this valley dry. Eli turned around. His eyes were dry, but something behind them was not. Something had cracked, not broken open, nothing that dramatic. More like a pressure equalized, like a knot that had been pulled in the wrong direction for 3 years and had just been for the first time pulled straight. How did Agnes come to have all this, he said. She's been watching Crest for 20 years. She kept everything, every receipt, every land transfer, every dispatch record her clerk could copy before it was destroyed. She kept it because she knew someday someone would come who was brave enough to use it. Why didn't she ever? Because she's a woman in a town where women aren't supposed to have opinions about men's business, Clara said. Because she was waiting for someone to fight back who had standing and history and a reason Crest couldn't dismiss. She met his eyes. She was waiting for you. She just needed someone to get you moving. Eli looked at the dispatch copy on the well rim, the paper that redistributed 3 years of carried weight. Not absolution, he would never grant himself that, and Clara didn't offer it but a rebalancing, a correction of the geometry. 5 days until the hearing, he said. I know. What's the plan? Agnes's records. Calloway's testimony if he shows up, I'm working on him. Every family Crest has squeezed or cheated standing together in one place. She paused. Not his courtroom, the town square, public, where he can't control the audience and he can't dismiss the evidence in private. Eli looked at her. And if it doesn't work, then we lose the land. She held his eyes, but we don't lose each other, and we don't lose the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the dispatch copy and folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. All right, he said. Mim. She went to see Dr. Emmett Farrow on the 3rd morning. She'd asked Agnes about him first. The story came in fragments, assembled from years of observation. A good doctor once trained properly arrived in Sweetwater Flats with competence and intention and had been systematically acquired by Crest over 15 years through the mechanism of debt that was never quite paid down, never quite written off, always hovering at the exact level that kept Farrow compliant without destroying him entirely. The perfect captive, useful exactly as long as he was afraid. He opened the door at 10 in the morning then with a whiskey glass in his hand. I don't see patients. I'm not a patient. Clara came in without being invited. The office smelled like the bottom of a long decline, not filth, but the accumulated evidence of a man who had stopped fighting his surroundings. A diploma on the wall yellowed and dusty, a medical bag on the table intact but untouched. My name is Clara Vane. I teach children at Eli Harrow's ranch. I know who you are. He closed the door, kept hold of the glass. Judge Crest is holding a hearing in 5 days to take Eli Harrow's land. He's going to use morality charges as cover for water theft. I need someone respectable to stand as witness, someone this town will believe. Farrow laughed. It was the kind of laugh that has given up on being funny. And you picked the drunk. I picked the doctor, Clara said, the man who took an oath to do no harm. I'm asking if that oath still means anything to you. He set the glass down. His hands trembled slightly. Not from the drink, from the effort of a man reacquainting himself with a conversation he'd been avoiding for years. Crest owns my practice, he said, my building, my equipment, my debts. If I speak against him, I lose everything. What did you lose already? Clara said. She kept her voice even without cruelty because cruelty wasn't the point and the man in front of her was not the enemy. How many patients have you turned away because they couldn't pay? How many children have you not treated because Crest said their families weren't worth his credit? How many mornings have you opened that door with a glass in your hand instead of a bag? She paused. What's that cost you, doctor, not in money, in your soul? The silence in the office was its own weather. Farrow looked at his glass, at his hands, at the diploma on the wall. I was a good doctor once, he said very quietly. I know, Clara said. Be one again. You have 5 days. She left before he could say no. Some maybes needed room to breathe. That evening, Harlan Crest came to the ranch. He arrived with 2 deputies, which was 1 more than necessary, and 1 fewer than threatening the precise calculation of a man who had spent decades perfecting the arithmetic of intimidation. He rode up in his black coat despite the heat and sat his horse at the gate with the bearing of someone who was accustomed to the geography of power, always elevated, always above, always waiting for the ground to come up and meet him. Eli was at the well. Clara was on the porch with Ren. Senora Soto appeared in the kitchen doorway. Raphael came from the barn with a pitchfork and a face that gave nothing away. Cade, then correcting himself, Harrow. A pause that was not an accident. I've heard some concerning reports. Judge, Eli said. He wiped his hands and walked to the gate. He did not open it. Reports of unauthorized residents, an unregistered school teacher, a Mexican family relocated onto your property in possible violation of... There's no property covenant, and you know it. Crest smiled. It was the smile that preceded foreclosure's warm, sorrowful, inevitable. I'm here as a friend, Eli, as someone who cares about this community. You're here about the well. The smile didn't falter. I'm here about order, about the proper way of doing things. He looked at the porch at Clara. You have an unmarried woman living under your roof. You have a Mexican family in your barn. You have children being taught by someone with no credentials recognized by this county. He spread his hands. Any one of these would be grounds for a hearing. Together. My credentials are from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Clara said from the porch. Recognized in every state of the Union. Crest looked at her. The way you look at something unexpected that has arrived in a place you thought you'd controlled. Miss Vane, I trust you received my letter of appointment. I received it. I also figured out why you sent it. She came down the porch steps. Eli didn't stop her. He moved slightly to make room, a quiet repositioning that put them side by side at the gate. You hired me knowing there was no boarding house in this town. No accommodation for a single woman. You had the stage drop me at Thornton Junction, 18 miles out in July, knowing the only shelter between there and here was Eli Harrow's ranch. You wanted me here under his roof so you could use it against him. A flicker in Crest's composed eyes. Just a flicker. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious plan. It took thought. I respect the effort, if not the morality. One of the deputies shifted in his saddle. The other watched Raphael and the pitchfork. Miss Vane, Crest's voice cooled by several degrees. You're a stranger here. You don't understand how this town works. I understand men like you, Clara said. You work the same everywhere. Crest gathered his reins. The politician's warmth was gone. What remained was the judge, cold, precise, certain of his ground. Very well. You have 2 weeks to vacate Miss Vane, Senora Soto, and the boy from this property. Cease all unauthorized teaching. Return to compliance with community standards. Failure to do so will result in a formal hearing at which I will present evidence of moral unfitness, improper land use, and failure to maintain standards of Christian decency. He paused. The penalty, if the court finds against you, is forfeiture of property. Your court, Eli said. Your evidence, your verdict. The law is the law, Harrow. The law is you, Crest. That's the problem. Crest turned his horse, paused with his back to them. 2 weeks. I'm being generous. He looked at Clara one more time. You should have stayed in Boston, Miss Vane. Texas isn't kind to women with opinions. Neither was Philadelphia, Clara said. I'm still here. They rode east. The dust rose behind them in a long curtain that hung in the still air and took a very long time to settle. When it was finally gone, the silence that replaced it was enormous. Senora Soto crossed herself. Raphael lowered the pitchfork by degrees. Ren had pressed herself against Eli's leg, both hands fisted in his trousers. He looked down at his niece, then at the road, then at the well. 2 weeks, he said. We've done more with less, Clara said, but her voice was thinner than before. That night, Crest came up again in a different way. They were sitting on the porch, Clara and Eli, after the house was quiet and the stars had committed fully to the sky. The heat had barely moved. Somewhere south, a coyote sang its broken song. I want to tell you something about Pharaoh, Eli said. He'd been quiet for a long time working toward it. Clara waited. The night Mateo died. When I finally got him to a doctor, it was Pharaoh. He was the district physician closest to the area. He paused. Pharaoh worked on him for 20 minutes. Then Crest arrived. I was outside. I couldn't hear what was said, but Pharaoh came out and told me Mateo was gone. Clara looked at him. I've thought about it a lot over 3 years. Mateo took the bullet in the side. It wasn't clean, but I've seen men survive worse. He looked at his hands. I never asked Pharaoh directly what happened in that room. I was destroyed. I took his word. Clara was very still. You think Mateo might have survived, she said. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe he was too far gone. Eli looked south toward the dark. But I've been thinking since you said you were going to see Pharaoh. I've been thinking about a man who keeps a secret heavy enough to put whiskey in his hand before noon and dust on his diploma and the look he gets when someone mentions the Reyes family. He paused. I think whatever happened in that room isn't the version Pharaoh told me. Clara sat with this for a long time. If Crest was there, she said slowly, and Crest needed Mateo not to survive, not just to die, but to stay dead without complications, without a recovery that might lead to questions, then the most useful thing Crest could do was tell a frightened doctor that the boy was already gone. Eli's voice was very quiet, and let the doctor believe it was mercy. Or tell the doctor that treating him was more trouble than it was worth. Or that. You need to ask Pharaoh directly, Clara said, before the hearing, not as accusation, as a question. He might not answer. He might answer everything. She looked at him. A man with that much whiskey and that much dust on his diploma is usually carrying something he can't put down. Sometimes all you have to do is ask. Eli was quiet for a moment, then, You're going to make a terrifying lawyer one day. I'm already a terrifying teacher, Clara said. Same skill set. Mayor. The fire came 9 days before the hearing. Clara woke to the smell of it, not wood smoke, not the honest burning of the stove. Something chemical, sharp, wrong. She was on her feet and moving before her mind had fully assembled the situation, grabbing Ren from the cot in one motion, the child's arms locking around her neck on instinct. Outside, the porch teaching corner was burning. Kerosene current. She could smell it even over the smoke, distinctive, specific, a choice rather than an accident. The floorboards where 7 children had sat 3 mornings ago were going up in orange and black. Eli and Raphael were already fighting it with buckets. Senora Soto beat at the edges with a soaked blanket. The books. Clara set Ren in the dirt at the edge of the yard. Stay here. Don't move. She ran for the trunk. It was against the porch wall, already blackening at the corners. She grabbed the handle. It didn't move. She braced and pulled. The heat came down across her forearms like a brand. The trunk came free just as the railing above it collapsed in a shower of sparks. She fell backward into the dirt. Eli dumped a bucket over the trunk and then, without pausing, over Clara in the same motion. She came up gasping and wet and coughing. The books are fine, she said. You could have burned alive. They're all I have. You have more than books, Clara. His voice was rough with smoke and something else. His hands were on her arms and they stayed there a beat longer than necessity required, and then he let go and turned back to the fire. They saved the cabin, lost the porch. The teaching corner was ash and char. Ren stood exactly where Clara had placed her rag doll, crushed against her chest, eyes tracking every movement. Not moving, not breaking, waiting. Raphael found the kerosene can behind the chicken coop. He held it up. Dalton buys this brand from the mercantile, he said. I've seen it. He's the only one. Eli took the can. His knuckles went white around the handle. Clara watched the ranger surface behind his eyes. The tracker. The hunter, the man who had spent 7 years knowing how to end things with finality. She had seen this before. She had stopped it before. Eli. He looked at her. I know. He set the can down with great deliberateness, like setting down a loaded weapon. I know what you're going to say. There's a line, he said before she could speak. When they come for a man's home, for the place where a child sleeps, then we make them answer. Yes, Clara said, we do, but not like this, not tonight. She looked at Ren, still standing in the dark with her rag doll and her terrible patience. Give me 2 days to do this my way. If it doesn't work, I'll hand you the matches myself. Eli looked at his niece, then at the ash that had been the teaching corner, then at the kerosene can. 2 days, he said, not 3. Yeah. In the morning, Clara rode into town. She stopped first at the Crane homestead. Nora Crane met her at the door with a baby on her hip and suspicion on her face that softened incrementally as Clara talked. The well, the families coming every morning for water, Crest's plan, the kerosene, the children who had been sitting on that porch. By the time Clara left, Nora Crane's face had gone through several iterations of fear and arrived finally at something harder and more durable. I'll come to the hearing, Nora said, and I'll bring every woman I know. She stopped next at Agnes Pryor's, where she collected the document copies, 20 years of records carefully organized in oilcloth, and she stopped last at Dr. Farrow's office, where she knocked and waited and knocked again. Farrow opened the door. He looked different. Not better exactly, but different in the way that a man who has made a decision looks different from a man who is still making one. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her. I need to ask you something, Clara said, and I need you to answer me honestly. Pharaoh stepped back. Let her in. She asked him about the night Mateo Reyes died. She asked him what happened in that room. She asked him what Crest said and what Crest asked, and what Pharaoh agreed to, and what he has been living with ever since. Pharaoh set down the glass he'd been holding. He set it down on the table and pushed it an inch away from him, and then another inch, and then he put both hands flat on the table and began to speak. He spoke for a long time. When he was finished, Clara sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "You'll testify to this at the hearing. I'll lose my practice. You've already lost it. You just haven't acknowledged the loss yet." She looked at the diploma on the wall. "Be the doctor that hung that up. Just once more. That's all I'm asking." Pharaoh looked at his hands. "One more time," he said. "Yes." Clara stood up. "Thank you, Dr. Pharaoh." She walked out into the Texas afternoon and rode back to the ranch on the sorry horse who had by this point entirely justified her name. And in her saddlebag she carried 20 years of evidence, and in her mind she carried the weight of what Pharaoh had told her, and she understood now that the hearing was not going to be what Crest expected. It was going to be considerably worse. Yeah. 3 days before the hearing, Raphael's cousin arrived. Her name was Lucia. 9 years old, spoke more Spanish than English, wrote her name with backward letters in a grin that could light up a room in a power outage. She arrived on a mule that was even sorrier than Clara's horse, and she came with her mother's blessing and the specific determination of a child who has heard that there is a school and has decided without negotiation to attend it. They rebuilt the teaching space in the back of the barn. Eli and Raphael laid boards. Senora Soto swept. Wren, with great seriousness, carried the books from the trunk and stacked them in order by size, which was not the most efficient organization system, but which she executed with complete conviction. 12 children on the first morning in the new space, 14 on the second. Clara taught the way she'd always taught, with urgency and warmth, and the deep conviction that a child's mind was the most important thing in any room she entered. She grouped the older children with the younger. She made Raphael her assistant. He read aloud to the little ones, stumbling, sweating, earning every word, and the children loved him for it, because his visible effort made their own feel possible. Wren sat at the edge. She did not speak. She did not participate exactly. But her lips moved with every word, tracing the shapes of sentences she was building in the only place she could still build them, in the private, absolute interior of herself. One afternoon, Emily Agnes Pryor's granddaughter, 10 years old and sharp as a clean edge, caught her. "She's saying the letters," Emily announced. "Miss Vane, look, Wren's saying the letters?" Every eye in the barn found Wren. Clara's heart broke in a way that had nothing to do with her own pain. "Emily," she said, her voice entirely level, "everyone learns at their own pace. We've talked about this." But she was doing it at her own pace. Final, gentle. Emily subsided. The lesson continued. Wren did not move her lips again that day. That night, Clara sat at the well in the dark with her head in her hands, and Eli found her there and sat down beside her, and she told him about Wren and about Emily and about the particular cruelty of being seen before you're ready. "She'll come back to it," Eli said. "You don't know that." "No, but she came back from 10 months of silence. She'll come back from an afternoon of embarrassment." Clara lifted her head and looked at the stars and thought about what she needed to tell him. About Pharaoh. About what Pharaoh had said in that office with his hands flat on the table and his glass pushed away. "Eli, I spoke with Pharaoh." "I know. He told me what happened the night Mateo died." She paused. "Mateo was alive when he arrived. He'd taken the bullet in the side. Pharaoh had seen a worse. He believed he could have treated it. He was beginning to." She kept her voice level. "Crest arrived 30 minutes in. I don't know what was said, but Pharaoh stopped the treatment. He told you that it was too late, that the boy was already gone." She paused again. "Pharaoh doesn't know if Mateo would have survived. He only knows he stopped trying when Crest appeared. He's been drinking ever since." The quiet was its own weather. "So Crest let him die," Clara said, "or made it happen. I don't know exactly which. Pharaoh doesn't either, but he'll testify to what he knows, that treatment was halted, that Crest was present, that the official account of Mateo's death is incomplete." Eli stood, walked several steps away. Clara waited. When he came back, something had changed in him again. Another degree of the rebalancing she'd been watching all week. Not lighter exactly, just more correctly weighted, more accurately distributed. "The morning of the hearing," he said, "we go together." He looked at her. In the starlight, his face was unguarded in a way it rarely was during daylight, and what she saw there was something she recognized because she had been carrying a version of it herself, the face of someone who had been moving towards something difficult for a long time and had finally stopped pretending it was only difficult. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Tell me." He took her hand, in the dark, held it with the careful deliberateness of someone doing something they are very certain about and are taking no chances with. "You walked 18 miles in one boot," he said. "You carried a trunk of books through a fire. You talked a drunk doctor back into his own soul. You found evidence that I've been carrying the wrong weight for 3 years." He paused. "I don't know what to do with any of that except tell you that I—" He stopped, started again. "I love you. I didn't plan on it. I didn't want it. But I love you, and I intend to say so before we walk into what we're walking into, because I'll be damned if I keep it to myself until after." Clara looked at him. "I love you too," she said. "I've been trying to talk myself out of it for the better part of 2 weeks, and I've made no progress whatsoever." He kissed her. She let him. It was honest in the way that everything he did was honest, not careful, not tentative, but deliberate, and presented the act of a person who has decided and is not hedging the decision. When they pulled apart, the coyote yipped somewhere north of the ridge, as if in commentary. "That's terrible timing," Clara said. "Probably," he said. "Crest will use it. He's using everything anyway. Might as well give him something real." 2 days until the hearing. The mesquite stood in the dark. The new well shaft was 40 feet down and still going. Somewhere in the barn, Wren lay awake, tracing letters on her blanket, her lips not moving, but something behind her eyes very much alive. The morning before the hearing, the well went dry. Clara was first to it before dawn with the bucket and the rope. The bucket went down and came back up wrong. The sound of it against the bottom came too soon, too hollow. She lowered it again. Same result. A mouthful of muddy sludge and a smell that hit her like a hand. Sharp, chemical, not the smell of a dying well, the smell of a decision. Eli. He was there in seconds. He pulled the rope hand over hand, fast and steady, and the bucket came up with its handful of poisoned water, and the smell was worse up close. "Arsenic," he said. His voice was so level it frightened her. The calm of a man who has reached the end of all the calculations that had never added up. He poisoned the well. Senora Soto appeared at the porch door. Raphael behind her. Wren in the kitchen window, barefoot, clutching her doll. "Nobody drinks from this well," Eli said. "Nobody. Not a drop." Tomas, Raphael. Clara caught herself recalibrated. "Raphael, ride to the Crane place. Tell them the water is contaminated. Then the Hatchet Ranch. Then every family who has been filling barrels here. Go." Raphael ran for the horse. "He doesn't need the hearing," Eli said. He said it flatly, without affect, the voice of a man who has run out of distance between himself and the thing pursuing him. "Without the well, the land is worthless. Without water, no one can stay. He just needs to wait." "No," Clara said. Eli looked at her. "He does not win like this." Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not. "This is not a land dispute anymore. This is attempted murder. Every family in this valley has been drinking from this well. If any of them—" The thought arrived in both their minds at the same moment. "The Cranes," Eli said. "Nora said they filled barrels 2 days ago. The baby—" He was already running for the horse. Clara ran after him. "I'm coming." "You can't ride fast enough." "Watch me." She rode behind him, arms around his waist, the horse laboring under the double weight across 4 miles of July road that felt like 40. When they arrived at the Crane homestead, Nora met them at the door with a face that needed no translation. "He's been sick since last night," she said. "I thought it was the croup again. I thought—" Clara pushed past her. The infant was gray-skinned and limp, pulse thread thin and fast, glassy eyes, lips cracked dry. "Clean water," Clara said. "Rainwater if you have it, anything that didn't come from Harrow's well, and clean cloths." Nora moved. Country women didn't break when there was work to be done. Clara worked over that baby for 3 hours. She forced clean water between his lips, drop by drop. She held him upright when the vomiting came. She watched his color and his breathing and his pulse, and she did not leave his side, and she did not let him go. Eli stood in the doorway, watching, not able to help and knowing it and staying anyway. He watched this woman who had walked 18 miles in a single boot to teach children, now fighting to keep one alive. He thought about the boy in Philadelphia, Samuel Washington, who had stood outside a school with a misspelled sign. He thought about Mateo Reyes under the mesquite. He thought about what Clara had said. I've seen what happens when you don't give up on people. By noon, the baby's color improved. By mid-afternoon, he cried. A thin, weak cry, but a cry life insisting on itself with the particular stubbornness of something that intends to continue. Nora collapsed into a chair and sobbed. He poisoned the water, she said. The water my baby drinks. Yes, Clara said. She didn't soften it. Didn't qualify. Judge Harlan Crest poisoned the only public water source in this valley, and your baby almost died because of it. Nora's sobs changed quality. The grief was still there, but rage had moved in alongside it, which is what happens when grief is given a name and a face. The hearing, she said. When is it? Tomorrow morning. Nora stood up, wiped her face, the face of a woman who had crossed a line and would not cross back. I'll be there, she said, and I'll bring the baby. She looked at Clara. Let them see what he did. Let them see what their silence costs. Clara took Nora's hands and held them. Bring him, she said. Yes. The morning of the hearing broke hot and windless. Clara dressed in the only clean thing she had, a blue cotton dress Senora Soto had washed and pressed the night before with the focused attention of a woman who understood that what you wore into a fight was its own kind of argument. Her shoes were still wrecked from the 18-mile walk, but she'd polished them until the leather looked like it had a future. Eli put on his one good shirt, white cotton frayed at the cuffs, buttoned to the throat despite the heat. He strapped on his gun belt, took it off, put it on again. Leave it, Clara said. He looked at her. Today you face him with something stronger than that. He took the gun belt off for the last time and hung it on the peg by the door. He straightened his cuffs, ran a hand through his hair. In the morning light in the white shirt, he looked like what he was, a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided that today he was going to set it down. Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was dressed already, ragdoll under one arm, the copy of Aesop's Fables under the other. She looked at Eli, then at Clara, then back at Eli, with the assessment of a 6-year-old who has been paying very close attention to everything for 10 months and has formed definite opinions. She held out her free hand, palm up, to both of them. Clara took one side, Eli took the other. They walked out to the wagon together. The town square was already full when they arrived. Clara's heart did something complicated when she saw the size of the crowd, bigger than she dared hope. Bigger than she'd allowed herself to plan for, because hope has a way of becoming a liability if you let it get too specific. Agnes Pryor stood at the edge with her granddaughter Emily, and 15 women from the valley clustered around her like a fortification. Nora Crane was there with the baby on her hip, the child pale still, but alive, wailing with the beautiful fury of something that has decided to continue existing. The Hatchett family, the Dawsons. Ranchers Clara had never met, drawn by the news of the poisoned well that had moved through the valley overnight the way real news moves, fast and unstoppable, carrying its own weight. But Crest had his people too. Dalton leaned against the bank wall with his arms crossed and his smirk in place. The Ferris boys flanked the courthouse steps. A cluster of merchants who depended on Crest credit stood together with the uncomfortable solidarity of people who are there because they feel they have no choice. And at the raised table on the courthouse porch, elevated above the crowd, because it was always about the elevation, Harlan Crest sat in his black coat like a man who had won before the proceedings began. 2 deputies flanked him. A county clerk sat at a smaller table with a ledger open. The machinery of authority assembled. Theater, Clara thought, designed for maximum intimidation. The raised platform, the official trappings, the armed men. He wants us looking up at him, she said quietly. I see it, Eli said. Don't look at him. Look at the crowd. That's where it matters. Crest called the hearing to order. His voice carried the practiced resonance of a man who had been performing authority for so long that performance and nature were no longer distinguishable. We are gathered to address a matter of community standards. Eli Harrow has been charged with moral unfitness, harboring unauthorized residents, and permitting unlicensed instruction on his property. These charges, if substantiated, carried a penalty of forfeiture under Section 12 of the County Land Code. He paused, let the weight of it settle. Mr. Harrow, you may speak in your defense. Eli stepped forward. Every eye in the square found him. Clara watched his back, straight, rigid, the back of a man walking towards something he couldn't outrun and had decided to stop running from. I ain't much for speeches, he said. His voice was rough but steady. So I'll just tell the truth and let you all decide what it's worth. He told it straight. 3 weeks ago, a woman collapsed on his road. Heat sick, no water, one boot. He brought her inside because that was what you did when someone was dying on your doorstep. That woman is Clara Vane, he said. A teacher hired by this judge delivered to a junction 18 miles out with no transport, no escort, no accommodation arranged. He looked at Crest. You knew she'd end up at my ranch. You planned it. Murmurs through the crowd. Crest's expression didn't move. That's a serious allegation. Do you have proof? I have her letter of appointment signed by you. I have the stage company's manifest showing you purchased a ticket to Thornton Junction, not Sweetwater Flats. And I have 20 years of your playbook, Judge Rishoao. He turned to the crowd. How many of you have had credit called in during a drought? How many of you were told your land wasn't worth fighting for? How many of you lost property to this man's bank after a crisis you didn't cause? Silence. But the silence was alive, full of held breath and clenched jaws and the sound of people recognizing a pattern they'd been living inside for so long they'd stopped seeing its shape. Crest leaned forward. This hearing concerns your moral fitness, Mr. Harrow, not my banking practices. It concerns justice, Eli said, and you've been standing in the way of it for 20 years. Enough, Crest's voice hardened. You harbor an unmarried woman. You house a Mexican family in your barn. You allow an unregistered teacher to instruct children without county approval. These are facts. Do you deny them? I deny that any of those things are crimes. The county code. Then the county code is wrong. The crowd shifted. Some approval, some unease. Crest sensed the uncertainty and pressed into it. Let's discuss your fitness to hold property, Mr. Harrow. Let's discuss your history. His voice dropped to the carrying tone of a man delivering a blow he'd been saving. 3 years ago, you were a Texas Ranger. You shot and killed a 15-year-old boy named Mateo Reyes, an unarmed child. You fled the Rangers in disgrace, and now you ask this town to trust you with their children's education. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of shock. People who hadn't known staring, people who had known looking away. Clara watched Eli's back, saw his shoulders tighten, saw his hands close at his sides. Hold, she thought, hold. That's true, Eli said. His voice cracked on the word, just slightly. I killed Mateo Reyes. I've lived with it every day since. I tend his grave. I send money to his family. I'll carry that boy's name until I die. He paused, breathed. The square was completely silent. But I want to ask you something, Judge. The night I was tracking that robbery suspect who gave the Rangers their direction, who told us to search south toward the Mexican settlements, when the robber was a white man heading north. Crest's composure flickered. A single degree, a crack in the surface. I don't recall the operational details. I do. I've relived that night 1,000 times. The dispatch came directing a ranger patrol into brush country south of the Nueces, into civilian homes in the dark. Eli looked at the crowd. A white robber heading north, and we were sent south. This is deflection. Clara stepped forward. She had the documents in both arms. 20 years of records copied and organized, wrapped in the same oilcloth that had kept them intact through everything Agnes Pryor had kept them through. She carried them the way you carry something important, not cautiously, but with the full weight of intention. It's not deflection, she said. It's a pattern. She turned to the crowd and held up the first page. 14 land seizures in 12 years, everyone following a crisis that Judge Crest either caused or exploited. The Reyes family's ranch seized 6 months after Mateo died. Water rights claimed on land taken from families too broken to fight. She set the documents on the clerk's table with a sound that was not loud but was final. These are copies. Agnes Pryor has the originals. Every receipt, every land transfer, every credit manipulation. 20 years. Agnes stepped forward from the crowd. She moved like a woman who had been waiting for this moment for long enough that she was no longer nervous about it. I kept every scrap of paper that man touched, she said to the square, and not to Crest, because I knew someday someone would be brave enough to read them. Crest stood, his chair scraped back. The mask was cracking, not broken, but showing the structure underneath. This hearing is about Eli Harrow, not about my... Then let's talk about the well. Nora Crane pushed through the crowd. The baby on her hip, pale but alive, crying with the small, determined persistence of survival. She held the child up so every person in the square could see his face. 3 days ago, someone poisoned Eli Harrow's well, the only reliable water source in this valley. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. My baby drank that water. He nearly teated us. 2 other children are sick. An old man at the Dawson place can't stand. She looked at Crest. Who benefits from destroying that well? Not Ely, it's his water, not us. We depend on it. The only person who benefits is the man who wants that land and doesn't care who dies to get it. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, anger, fear, accusation. Crest pounded the table. Order, I will have order. You'll have the truth. Agnes's voice cut through the noise like a blade. For the first time in 20 years, Harlan Crest, you'll have the truth in this square. Dr. Emmett Farrow stepped out of the crowd. Clara hadn't seen him arrive. He was sober. Clean-shaven in a suit that had seen better decades but was pressed and buttoned, his hands steady at his sides. He moved through the crowd with the careful deliberateness of a man who has made a decision he intends to be final. I tested the well water, Farrow said. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who has remembered who he was trained to be. Arsenic, enough to kill a grown man with sustained exposure. Enough to kill a child with a single cup. He looked at Crest. I've kept my mouth shut for 15 years, he said. Because you own my practice and my debts and my silence. You don't own them anymore. He paused. I would rather be a broke, honest doctor than a comfortable coward. He looked at Eli. The night Mateo Reyes was brought to me, he said clearly enough for the square to hear. I was treating him. The wound was serious. I cannot say with certainty what would have happened. But I can say that Judge Crest arrived before treatment was complete. And I can say that after he arrived, the treatment stopped. He did not look away from Eli's face. I told you the boy was already gone. I told myself the same. I have been telling myself that for 3 years. His voice steadied. The official account of Mateo Reyes' death is incomplete. I will provide a full written statement to whatever legal authority requests it. The silence that followed was its own kind of verdict. Crest turned to his deputies. Arrest Harrow. Arrest the woman. Clear this square. Neither deputy moved. Crest repeated himself. The older deputy, a gray-haired man named Woodson, who had been wearing a badge for 16 years, reached up and unpinned it slowly, set it on the table beside Crest. My daughter drank from that well, Judge, he said. She's been sick 2 days. He stepped down from the porch and stood beside Eli. The younger deputy looked at Crest, at the crowd, at the badge on his own chest. He unpinned it with slightly less ceremony and set it beside Woodson's. My wife is pregnant, he said. She filled our barrels on Tuesday. Crest stood alone on the porch, no deputies, no authority, just a man in a black coat watching the thing he'd built come apart in real time with the precision of something that had been flawed in its foundations and had only needed the right pressure at the right point. Dalton pushed off the bank wall. Judge, you want me to? Hank Hatchett stepped into his path. A rancher twice Dalton's size with arms like fence posts in the specific patience of a man who has been waiting for the right moment for a long time. You've done enough, Hatchett said. You and the Ferris boys, burning porches and beating children. That's over. Dalton looked at the Ferris brothers. They were already backing away, reading the crowd the way cowards read danger accurately and late. Clara turned away from Crest. She turned to face the people in the square, the ranchers and merchants, the afraid and the ashamed and the angry. And she spoke not to Crest, but through him, past him, to the town he'd been standing between and itself for 20 years. Sweetwater Flats doesn't need a judge who steals, she said. It needs a school, a real one open to every child, every name, every color, every family that can pay, and everyone that can't. It needs a doctor who treats the sick because they're sick, not because they're rich. It needs water that belongs to everyone, not to one man's bank account. She looked at Eli. He looked back, standing in the dust, sweat-soaked, carrying 3 years of public shame that was in the process of being rewritten in front of everyone who had ever believed it. This man saved my life, she said. Her voice broke just slightly. On the word life, something gave way in it. He carried a stranger inside from the heat. He opened his well to families he barely knew. He raised a child who lost her mother. He sent money every month to the family of a boy he killed by accident because accountability mattered more to him than comfort. She wiped her eyes. If that's moral unfitness, then this town needs more unfit people. From the crowd, Rafael Soto walked forward. He was 16 years old and he had bruises on his arms, and he walked with the straight back of someone who has decided that their spine is not going to bend today, regardless of what is being asked of it. He walked to the porch steps. He looked up at Crest. You told your men to beat me for taking water, he said. His voice carried every bruise. You told this town my name meant I didn't deserve to drink. He paused. I can read now, Judge. Miss Vane taught me, and I read every word in those documents, including the ones about my people's land. And then from beside Eli a voice, small, barely above a whisper, but perfectly clear. The sun was stronger. Every head turned. Wren stood at Eli's side, her hand in his, her ragdoll tucked under one arm. She was looking up at Harlan Crest with eyes that held no fear. Not the forced bravery of someone pretending, but the genuine absence of it, the way a child is fearless when they are entirely certain of what is true. The sun was stronger, she said again, than the wind. 10 months of silence. Broken not by grief, not by love, not by necessity, but by a fable about a traveler in a cloak and the argument between two kinds of power. Broken in public, in front of everyone. Chosen. Ruth Miller started crying. Agnes Pryor put her arm around her granddaughter. Senora Soto pressed her rosary to her lips and murmured something private. And the crowd, the mothers and ranchers, the laborers and merchants, the afraid and the ashamed and the ready began to clap. It started with Agnes, spread to Nora, spread to the Hatchett family and the Dawsons, and the women Clara had visited door-to-door, spread to men who had been silent for years, to families who had sided with Cress because they had been afraid, to shopkeepers who had kept their heads down through a decade of Tuesday mornings with their hands in someone else's pocket. Cress gathered his papers. His hands were steady. She would give him that. He gathered them with the precision of a man who had already calculated his next move and several after that. He stepped down from the porch without looking at anyone and walked toward the bank. "This isn't over, Harrow," he said as he passed. "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "It is." Crest kept walking. The crowd parted for him, not with respect, but with the instinct you have around a wounded animal that hasn't yet understood its own condition. When the bank door closed, the square exhaled. 20 years of held breath released into the hot July air. "Barb." Eli found Clara holding Nora Crane's baby. Ruth Nora had pressed the infant into her arms before Clara could object. The child was warm and squirming and alive, wailing with the magnificent indignation of someone who has survived something and intends to register a complaint about it. Clara held the baby and felt the weight of a life continued, and it was the heaviest, most beautiful thing she had ever carried. Eli came up beside her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not letting me ride in there with my fists. You'd have done fine with your fists." She looked at him over the baby's head. "But this way, nobody gets buried except Crest." Crest buried himself. We just handed him the shovel. Wren tugged Eli's trouser leg. He looked down. She raised her arms, the universal gesture of a child who wants to be picked up, and he lifted her, and she wrapped herself around him with the specific grip of someone who has been afraid for a long time and is briefly completely done with it. "Home," she said. Her voice was still rough with disuse, every word still costing something, but she said it with total conviction. "Home, Uncle Eli." "Yeah, bird," he said into her hair. "Home." "Yeah." The ride south to the Reyes homestead took most of the next day. Eli did not speak for the first 2 hours. Clara rode beside him on the sorry horse and let the silence be what it needed to be. Raphael came along on his mother's mule, the document copies wrapped in oilcloth across his saddle. He'd read every page twice, and his jaw hadn't unclenched since. "When we get there," Eli said finally, "I don't want anything softened, not on my account." "I know," Clara said. "They might not want to hear it. That's their right. We show up anyway." Dolores Reyes was sitting on a stone foundation when they arrived, all that was left of what had been a home. She was shelling beans into a cracked bowl. She looked up when the horses came down the road, and her face when she saw Eli went through something complicated. Not fear, not hatred, resignation. The look of a woman who has already lost everything and is calculating what else might be taken. Eli dismounted, took off his hat, walked toward her the way he walked toward anything wounded, steady, deliberate, nothing hidden. "Senora Reyes," he said. "Mr. Harrow." Her voice was flat, polite the way a closed door is polite. "I brought something you need to see, and someone to explain it." He gestured to Raphael, who dismounted and approached with the documents. He spoke in Spanish, first rapid, respectful, explaining what the papers contained. Dolores listened without expression. Then she held out her hand and took the pages. She read them slowly. Clara watched her face. The flatness cracked, first around the eyes, then the mouth, then the hands, which began to tremble so badly the paper shook. "He sent you to us," she said. She looked at Eli. "Crest sent the rangers to our land that night." "Yes, ma'am." "Mateo was hunting rabbits." "Yes, ma'am." "I know you shot my son." "Yes, ma'am, I did." "And this man," she pressed her lips together. "Then this judge, he's the reason you were there." "That doesn't change what I did," Eli said. "My hand, my bullet. I will carry that until I'm dead. I won't ask you to forgive it, but you deserve to know he used Mateo's death to take your land. He planned it. All of it. Dolores set the papers down on the stone step. She looked at the ruined foundation, at the collapsed well, at the land that had held a family in a future and had been reduced by design to this. 3 years, she said. 3 years I've hated you, prayed for God to punish you, cursed your name every morning, and now you ride here and tell me you were a weapon too. I was, Eli said, but a weapon that fires is still responsible for what it hits. I'm not here to escape that. Don't quote philosophy at me, Mr. Harrow. My son is in the ground. I know where he is. I tend his grave. Something broke in Dolores's face. Not softened, broke. The way ice breaks on a river when the current underneath finally finds its force. You tend his grave, she said. It was not quite a question. Every week, I planted mesquite over him. It's grown tall, gives shade. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, twice. Then the iron came back because women like Dolores Reyes did not have the luxury of staying broken for long. She looked at Clara. Who is she? Clara Vane. She's the teacher who found the records. Clara dismounted and walked toward Dolores. She didn't extend her hand the woman hadn't offered. Senora Reyes, Judge Crest did this to 14 families. Yours was the worst because he used your son's death, to cover a land seizure. These documents prove it. Agnes Priority has filed the originals with the county seat in Austin. Every newspaper in Texas will have a copy within the week. He can't fight what's public. Dolores looked at the papers, at Eli, at Raphael, who stood quietly with his hands at his sides, a Mexican boy carrying English documents that proved what people like them had always known and had never been allowed to say. My son liked to read, she said suddenly. He was teaching himself from the Bible, the only book in the house. She looked at Clara. Are you any good? I was fired for being too good, Clara said. I taught children that powerful men said didn't deserve to learn. Dolores studied her for a long measuring moment. Then she looked at Eli. You love this woman. The question was so direct it startled him. Yes, ma'am. Does she make you better than you were? He looked at Clara. Every day. Dolores was quiet. Then she said, maybe God's punishment is not what I prayed for. Maybe God's punishment is making you live, making you build, making you carry Mateo's name while you do it. She stood up, small and bent and fierce the way certain people are fiercer for being bent. I'll come to Sweetwater Flats, she said. Not for you, for my son's land, and for every family he stole from. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Harrow, she stopped him as he turned. The mesquite, does it bloom? Every spring, he said. Yellow flowers. The bees love it. Dolores closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was steady. Good, she said. He always liked yellow. Eat. They returned to the ranch at dusk to find it transformed. Hank Hatchett's wagon was in the yard, 6 other ranchers with it. They had lumber and tools and the organized energy of men who build things, because building is what they do when they don't know what else to do with the feeling. The frame of a structure was already up against the cabin's east wall, real walls, a roof line, large enough for 20 children. What is this? Clara breathed. Agnes Pryor sat on the wagon tailgate with an apple and the expression of someone who has waited long enough. Your school teacher. Did you think we were going to let you teach on a burned porch forever? The well. Callaway tested the aquifer. Arsenic didn't reach the deep water table, just contaminated the pump in the upper layer. Agnes took a bite of apple. Hatchett's crew are digging a new shaft now, 10 feet west. They'll hit clean water by morning. Clara sat down on the wagon step. Just sat down because her legs had made a decision without consulting the rest of her. Eli crouched beside her. Hey, she dropped her hands. Her face was wet and shining, and she wasn't trying to hide either. They're building a school, she said, with actual walls. I can see that, for children whose names they used to pretend they couldn't pronounce. He cupped her face with both hands. Rough thumbs. Careful. That's what happens when you show people they're better than they've been acting. Most folks want to be good, Clara. They just need someone to go first. I didn't go first. You did. You carried a stranger inside from the heat. You walked 18 miles to teach kids. We could argue about this all night. We could, he said, or we could help them build. They built until dark. Clara held boards while Hatchett hammered. Eli worked the saw until his arms shook. Raphael hauled shingles with the focus of a boy who had decided this moment was going to be permanent in him. Senora Soto fed everyone tamales and coffee and kept the children organized and fed and, when necessary, out of the way. Somewhere in the noise and sawdust and the smell of pine sap and fresh-cut lumber, the line between Eli's ranch and the community dissolved. The Hatchet Boys sang something off-key and cheerful. Agnes and Nora Crane sat together in the wagon bed and talked with the ease of people who have been through something and can now afford to sit down. Wren sat in the middle of it all. She had the Aesop's fables in her lap, and she was reading aloud to Emily Loom and three younger children, her voice still rough and new, every word still costing the small effort of rediscovery. She traced the words with her finger as she went. She stumbled. She went back. She tried it again. The fox wanted the grapes, she read, but they were too high. So the fox said, she looked up at Emily. I didn't want them anyway. That's what people say when they can't have something. They pretend they didn't want it. Emily grinned. Like Billy Parker saying he didn't want to play with us because girls are stupid. Exactly like that, Wren said. Clara heard it from across the site. She stopped hammering, looked at Eli. He'd heard it too. Wren wasn't just reading, she was interpreting, teaching, taking the stories she'd absorbed in silence and giving them back with understanding, attached with her own meaning folded in. She's going to be a teacher, Clara said quietly. God help us all, Eli said. But he was smiling, the third real smile she'd counted since she arrived. 5. The school was finished in 4 days. 20 families contributed, lumber nails, 2 panes of glass for the windows, a cast iron stove from Agnes for winter, a bell from the old church that had stood empty for a decade. Dr. Farrow donated his medical library, which he wouldn't need since he'd decided to use the actual practice of medicine as his library going forward. Senora Soto painted the door frame blue because it was good luck, and she wasn't asking anyone's permission. Josie Clara stood inside the empty room and turned in a slow circle. It smelled like pine sap and possibility, like something that was going to be used. She thought about this classroom in Philadelphia. Polished floors, gas lamps, a piano in the corner. She thought about this room, rough-cut lumber, 2 windows, a stove, a dirt floor that would be swept every morning by children who were about to learn that the act of sweeping a floor you intend to learn in is its own kind of commitment. She could not have said which room meant more. Both, she decided. Both meant everything, because both were places where children were told by the act of having a place at all that they mattered. Need a sign, Agnes said from the doorway. I know what I wanted to say. Eli carved it himself. 2 evenings by lamplight, Wren holding the wood steady while he worked. She watched his hands with the focused attention she gave to everything, learning the way a knife moves through wood, the way a letter takes its shape from intention and patience. When he was finished, he hung it above the door and stepped back. Sweetwater Flats. School, all welcome, no exceptions. No exceptions, Clara said. No exceptions, Eli confirmed. He looked at the sign, then at her. Even kids whose uncles can't spell. Your spelling is fine. I misspelled exceptions 3 times. Ask Wren. Wren nearby nodded with great solemnity. He did, she said. Laughter real full, unreserved from all of them. From Eli and Clara and Wren and Raphael and Senora Soto and Agnes Pryor and Hatchet and his boys. Laughter in a schoolhouse that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago in a valley that had been dying of thirst and fear among people who had been strangers or enemies or both. The first official school day brought 26 children. They came on horses and mules and on foot. White children, Mexican children, 2 Comanche children whose father worked the cattle drives and who arrived with the specific wariness of people accustomed to being turned away and who were not turned away and who discovered this fact about 20 minutes into the first lesson when they realized no one had asked them to leave. Clara taught them all. Raphael was her assistant. He read the morning lesson aloud, still stumbling on some words, still earning them with visible effort, and the children loved him for it because his struggle made their own feel possible. Wren read to the youngest ones during rest time. Her voice was growing stronger each day, finding its channel. She spoke more at home now, too, asking questions, making observations, once arguing with Eli about whether chickens were smarter than horses, a debate she won with a chain of logic that left him genuinely speechless. She gets that from you, Eli told Clara one evening. She's known me 3 weeks. That's long enough to catch stubbornness. 10. Dolores Reyes arrived in August on a borrowed mule. She came with Agnes Pryor's documents in a fury that had been sharpening for 3 years and had arrived at something harder and cleaner than fury purpose. She met with the county clerk from Austin, filed formal contestation of her land seizure, and within a week, 7 other families had done the same. Crest fought back, hired lawyers, filed counterclaims. But the documents were meticulous and the pattern undeniable, and by September, a reporter from Austin had arrived with sharp eyes and a faster pencil, and the story ran under the headline, "The Judge Who Stole a Valley." Crest resigned the bench in October, left town in November quietly at night with 2 wagons of possessions and a reputation that would follow him the rest of his life. Nobody noticed he was gone until Agnes mentioned it at the Mercantile the next morning. "Good riddance," Agnes said. That was his eulogy. Ishidem. The new well tested clean by late August. Hatchett's crew had gone 40 feet deep past the contaminated layer and hit water that ran cold and clear and tasted like something that didn't have a history. Eli stood at the new pump the morning it first flowed. He watched clean water pour into the trough, and something inside him that had been clenched for 3 years, since before the land, since before the guilt, since before any of it, finally released. Clara found him there. He was crying. Not the racking kind, the quiet kind, grief leaving to make room. She stood beside him and didn't touch him and didn't speak. Let him have it. "Sarah would have liked you," he said after. "Tell me about her." He told her. The garden that made the whole valley jealous. The specific quality of her quiet. The way she'd told him to go every time he left, because that's what people do when they love someone. "She died because I wasn't there. She died because you loved a life that took you away sometimes," Clara said. "Both things are true." He looked at the water in the trough. Clean water, earned water. "I want to marry you," he said. She looked at him. Wet-faced, red-eyed, standing over a well that had nearly been the end of everything he'd built. "I know." "Is that a yes?" "That's an ask me properly and find out." He laughed. Standing in there at the new well pump on the 10 acres of drought-cracked Texas land, a man who had been destroyed by the world and had, with considerable help, decided not to stay destroyed. He laughed the way people laugh when they've been given back something they didn't expect to get back. He asked her properly that evening. On the rebuilt porch, Wren beside him, because the child had insisted on being present and had made her case with 3 Aesop's fables and a drawing of herself as the flower girl. Raphael and Senora Soto pretended not to watch from the kitchen window and did so very badly. Eli got down on one knee. He held out the wooden horse he'd been carving for 2 weeks. Small, rough, perfect, carved with the specific care of a person who has no ring, and has therefore put everything into what they do have. "I ain't got money," he said. "I got 10 acres of drought-cracked dirt, a well that someone tried to poison, a burned porch I rebuilt with borrowed lumber, and a niece who is smarter than both of us combined." He held her eyes. "That's my whole offer. Will you take it?" Clara took the wooden horse, turned it in her hands, felt the hours in it, the intention. "Yes," she said, "on one condition. Name it. We build that school bigger every year, until every child in this valley can read." "Deal." Wren threw her arms around both of them. Finally, she said a word nobody had taught her that she had been saving for exactly the right moment. "Yen." The wedding was simple. Dr. Farrow officiated because nobody had gotten around to hiring a new preacher, and the old doctor said he'd read enough scripture to manage. The whole valley came. Nora Crane brought the baby, fat and healthy, now screaming with magnificent impartial fury. Agnes brought 3 pies and a flask she thought nobody saw. Dolores Reyes came. She arrived near the end on the borrowed mule carrying a small wooden cross, hand-carved. Mateo's name and dates cut into it with care. She gave it to Eli. "For the mesquite tree," she said, "so he has a proper marker." Eli held the cross. His hands didn't shake. "Thank you, Senora Reyes. You call me Dolores now." She looked at Clara. "Take care of this man. He carries more than he shows." "I know," Clara said. "So do I." Dolores almost smiled. "That's why it will work." Raphael stood as Eli's best man. He wore a shirt his mother had made from fabric Agnes had donated, and he read from the Aesop's fables, the fable of the north wind and the sun, in English so clear and strong that Senora Soto wept with a pride that had nowhere else to go. The sun was stronger, bum. He read his voice carrying across the assembled families. Not because it fought harder, because it gave warmth instead of force, and the traveler chose to open up. He closed the book, looked at Eli and Clara. "That's what these 2 did," he said. "They gave warmth, and a whole valley chose to open up." Real applause, the kind that has been held in for a long time. It bounced off the schoolhouse walls and carried across the dry hills, and maybe reached a mesquite tree on the south end of the property where a boy named Mateo rested under yellow flowers that the bees loved. That night, after the guests had gone and the children slept, and Senora Soto snored gently in the barn, She'd made more home than most parlors. Eli and Josie Clara sat on the porch. Their porch, their home, their impossible, improbable, stubbornly built life. That first day, Eli said, when I found you in the dust, I almost walked away. I know. Ren stopped me. I know that too. She leaned against his shoulder. She told me, if I'd walked away, you didn't. But if I had to, you didn't, Eli. That's what matters. Not the almost. The did. She took his hand. You carried me inside. Everything else grew from that. He put his arm around her, held on. Outside the well pump stood over 40 feet of clean water. The mesquite stood over Mateo Reyes's grave. The schoolhouse stood with its sign in the moonlight. All welcome, no exceptions. And it was not yet winter, and the school needed a new roof before winter came, and the well pump needed new fittings, and Wren wanted them on, and had presented her case with 3 fables and a drawing of a puppy wearing a sheriff's badge. From inside the cabin, Wren's voice drifted through the open window. She was reading to herself before sleep. The tortoise and the hare, slow and steady, going back when she stumbled, never giving up. Eli listened. Clara listened. 2 people who had been broken by the world and rebuilt by each other, sitting on a porch they'd hammered from burned lumber and borrowed nails, listening to a child who had remembered how to speak, reading about persistence and courage and the quiet strength of not giving up. The sign caught the moonlight. All welcome, no exceptions. And in a valley that had been dying of thirst, where a judge had stolen land and poisoned water and tried to crush every family that stood between him and what he wanted, something had taken root. Not just a school, not just a well, not just a family built from wreckage, something deeper. The stubborn, persistent, unkillable belief that people deserve better. That when one person is brave enough to say so, others find the courage to stand. Clara had walked 18 miles in killing heat with 1 boot and a trunk of books. Eli had carried a stranger inside from the dust. Wren had spoken 4 words that broke 10 months of silence. Raphael had come back every day despite everything that waited for him on the road. Dolores Reyes had crossed a valley to reclaim a dead son's name. Agnes Pryor had kept records for 20 years and waited. Emmett Farrow had set down the glass and picked up the oath. Nora Crane had held up her baby and demanded that everyone see what silence costs. Every single one of them had been told they didn't matter. Every single one of them had refused to believe it. That was the story of Sweetwater Flats. Not a fairy tale, not a legend, just people, flawed, frightened, stubborn people who chose to build when it would have been easier to break. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you didn't expect, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this one survive because of people like you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Until the next one, take care of each other.